So to the main question here. So this question about peak globalization and maybe is it already in our rearview mirror? I noticed this initially in a tweet that you put out on Twitter or X or whatever it's called now. Um, uh, and maybe if you can just give a little backstory to the data set that you were looking at there. We have had periods in the past where we've shifted from a more globalized economy to a lesser one. So it's not like this has never happened, but certainly globalization's been a really big trend for most living people. I mean, most folks watching this video, that's kind of all they've known has been increasing globalization. If that trend is truly starting to plateau and perhaps start reversing, what implications is that going to have?
Well, I think let me pull up the chart if you'll bear with me, because I think it's a good chart. Can you see this?
Yep.
I think it's a great. This was great context over a 200-year time frame. Like, what have we experienced? Most of us, and what the chart is the amount of trade that has occurred, as a percent of the global economy. And so, measured as total imports as a percent of GDP, reflected by, adding up all the countries based upon their population, right? So take all the countries, population, weight them, imports as a percent of GDP. And what you see here is, relative to history, we've got one of the biggest, basically the most global trade we've ever had in the last 150 years, which is not that surprising, in particular since we've brought on, over the course of the last 50 years, a huge number of different economies into the global mix. First, Japan and Asia, and then China coming after that. And so basically everyone alive today only knows this post-war surge in global production integration that you see, starting in 1945 and basically rising until the financial crisis, and really just after, all the way to COVID. And that's a really important dynamic. But it is, because what it did is it increased a lot of efficiency. It was a downward pressure on prices. It was a significant pressure on the middle class of particularly the expensive developed world in terms of their wages, and basically just created a ton of efficiency in the economy. I mean, today, like maybe not today, but if you go back 5 or 10 years, basically every good and almost every service was basically either built or done in the most efficient place in the world, where the productivity adjusted cost of that labor to get that service or good done was the lowest possible cost everywhere. And that getting to a peak in that and then possibly reversing that creates a radically different dynamic than basically anyone's experienced. But it's not that unusual in sort of a global economy sort of sense to have these sorts of ebbs and flows, from the post-World War I through World War II environment, a lot of isolationism, a big drop. You had the UK dynamic, when the UK became the global leader, you had a big expansion in global trade. And as they trailed off, that also faded. So it's not like these things are certain. I think many of us sort of take for granted that, trade globalization is the reality forever. And it's definitely not necessarily the case.